What were the numbers back then? Like year one would have been what, like a couple $100K in terms of revenue?
Yeah, I think it took about to get year 7, I think, where we hit $1 million US.
What did the contract look like?
At the beginning, we paid monthly. I had a vacuum paucity of business knowledge, and we're just making the rules up as we went along.
You started one of the iconic companies in Canada, eSentire, been around now for, I guess, over 20 years. And you have, I mean, now it's worth over $1 billion, doing many hundreds of millions in revenue.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Eldon, welcome to the show, man.
Pablo, good to be here.
You started one of the iconic companies in Canada, eSentire, been around now for, I guess, over 20 years.
It's hitting 24.
Hitting 24. It's incredible, right? To have a company that actually lasts that long, especially given just how much the world, like how fast things are changing. And you have, I mean, now it's worth over $1 billion, doing many hundreds of millions in revenue, but it didn't start like the classic venture way. So really curious to dive into that. Maybe take us back to that time. Like we're talking, what, like 2001 or so?
Yeah, so started at the end of 2001, and to sort of set it up, I think where it came from, I'd been working at a prime brokerage in New York, the .com 2000 era, building security systems in process at this prime brokerage for hedge funds and for the prime brokerage themselves. And that was my, you go to New York to seek your fortune during the .com gold rush, lived through the February, March 2001 dot bomb meltdown. I had a kid who was born in May 2001. So I was living in New York, coming back on the weekends, and then 9/11 put a fork in it and said maybe it's time to go home. And so it started off with sort of a consulting idea. I knew that I wanted to build a services business. I had zero business acumen. I knew what the hustle that was required to do consulting. And I could always go back to that. So, came back, took a $150,000 line of credit on the house and started this company with a buddy of mine who I'd known since the first grade, and just started cybersecurity. It wasn't even called cybersecurity back then. It was information security consulting, and that was sort of the start of it. We were selling to my network of customers I'd worked with in Toronto and in New York.
By the way, how crazy was that market crash, like that time, post the .com? We've obviously had many market crashes since then, 2008, and then, in 2022, we had a bit of one, obviously, right before, like, the first few months of the pandemic. But I find, when I read about those in 2001, it just feels way more visceral than the ones that, like, these new ones, I don't know, they just seem so short-term, like, they seem like they get fixed so fast. I'm just curious what it was like, back then.
Well, there was no rescue, right? There was no rescue. There was no bailout. Amazon was not guaranteed to survive.
Crazy,
right? But there was some insanity, right? The multiples on public stock. In every .com, it was the rush to get listed and just giving out options like their toilet paper, to everybody around. And like the DSL stocks, like that was really the hot thing, that DSL was going to change the world. And the internet is around, and it emerged stronger. But there's a lot of wreckage across almost everything. I think Nortel was dealt a fatal blow in that time, and Amazon pivoted, right? And so they just don't sell books at a loss, right? So there's a lot of good that comes out of that fire, but there was a lot of damage. A lot of retail investors that got lost everything, buying things on margin. So there was a lot of fallout, and it shook up. I was part of that sort of Silicon Alley, as they called New York at that time. But there's some big names that emerged from it stronger.
And why did you decide to go like the consulting route instead of starting like, I don't know, like an internet company or whatever else was like kind of hot at the moment?
I just, you build what you know, right? And I knew, here's the problem, here's what people need, here's the itch that I can scratch. So it fit really well. Like I understood the horizon, the problem set. I had excellent contacts within these hedge funds that were spinning out of the prime brokerage. These were all people that I'd worked with that became CTOs there. And I recognized that they needed these solutions that a tier one bank would have, but couldn't afford them because they were, a hedge fund that's running 2 or 3 billion of money still has concerns, but they can't afford their own full-time security staff, whereas a tier one bank, like Morgan or Goldman would have.
And by the way, the 150K that you took out, like what was the main use of that? Obviously, you're not like building product. Did you hire people right away?
Yeah, we hired some people. We got office space. We had to buy servers. We had to buy internet. Like this was, back in 2001, 2002, you had to build your own server room. You had to be your own sysadmin. There was no going on AWS and spinning up an instance like that. It was, everything required physical on-prem people and tech. And so that all costs, right? It was crazy, right? And I don't think I'd recommend anyone doing that. Even if if you have a house more or less paid off, which is almost impossible from like these days,
Yeah,
right? And so like I would not necessarily recommend it. It was, incredibly risky, but I didn't know enough about raising money to even go to the market then. And I didn't ask friends and family because I didn't want to let them down. Like that would, it would make for a very uncomfortable discussions at Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? So it was just sort of self-financed and paid ourselves very little and just squeezed every dollar that we could. Got, Waterloo co-ops that did a lot of the heavy lifting at the beginning. Both my co-founder and I are UW grads. It had a lot of luck along the way. I burnt a lot of shoe leather flying down to New York and trying to sell and do the consulting and do the, all of these pieces. And back home, my co-founder would be busily coding behind the scenes. And so it was pedal down that sort of, 996 that Jack Ma, right? It was easily, 997. It was every single day. I used to joke that I worked half days. It was like 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. That was my popular refrain back then. I'm not exaggerating. It was an awful lot. And, I could say that if this thing doesn't work out, it won't be because we didn't try hard enough.
Did taking that line, which you don't recommend, but did that fuel you or did it like suffocate you? Like what was the impact of that emotionally on your desire to kind of make this thing work?
That was just a cushion. And, this is like, it cannot fail. It cannot fail. There are plenty of times where I felt, okay, I just can't do this anymore. And between, what I felt I owed my family and maybe surprisingly, the true believers along the way, who were the first clients that really believed in what we were doing and supported us almost, bend over backwards to support us in every possible way, acting as references and acting as, opening their networks to us and really cheerleading those sort of early Johnny Appleseeds. I did not want to let them down because they put their reputations on the line and, their own jobs on the line to help me succeed. So that was at least as big a concern or a thought than the money itself.
Tell me about who was your first customer? How did you land them?
So my first customer was ING Asset Management out of New York. So the prime brokerage that I had been working at before was ING. It got sold to ABN AMRO. And there was this was the early 2001. There was an ISP that was going out of business, and both the prime brokerage and also the asset management group used this ISP. So we had to do this cutover. We had a week's worth of grace before we had to do the cutover. And so, that was my job, right? So I was prepping to do that on a Saturday for the prime brokerage. And this other arm of ING needed somebody else to do it. Their head of networking started asking everybody around. Nobody wanted to work on any more than they had to. And so it came to me and I said, yeah, I'll do it, but I have to do it on Sunday. So we'd go live on the Monday morning. Sunday would have to be it. And, I'd only known this person, the guy who was in charge of tech. His name's Andrew Rawson. I'd only met him to see him. We're walking back from lunch and the two groups past each other. But I said, yeah, let's say a couple of hours and we'll do the cutover. I'll be there Sunday morning. We'll do the cutover, test everything, no big deal. Gave $60 an hour, something like $60, $80. It was just like, yeah, like no big deal. So I did the cover on a Saturday for my prime contract, and then went over and on a Sunday morning, went over and did the cutover, and 3 or 4 hours testing everything and the market data feeds and things like that.
But this is still when you're working, right? Like your full-time job.
This is when I'm still working, on the contract. So this is before I started eSentire. So they did this, and it all was fine. It all went well, and so I kept in touch with Andrew, and as I came back to Canada, he was like, "I've got some things for you to do here," and so we would just do other little tech pieces just on contract. And then I think we were at a dinner, and he's like, "Is there anything you like? What are you doing right now?" And so I'm trying to build this security services company that we're looking for network traffic, we're looking for bad behavior, all this kind of stuff, and try to sort of the tools of an incident response team would have without having to fly in people. So instead of having to wait 24 hours for an incident to be resolved, you you have people who have the tools, they're online, they're remote, they dig in, and within an hour, it's all taken. He's like, "That's really interesting. I'd like to help you out with that." And that's how it began. I had dinner with him last week or 2 weeks ago. And we were talking about how unlikely this whole scenario is. Like, who these days would give like a raw founder just full access to their network just to try things. Let's see if this thing works, right? Like it's absurd to think how this would be, but that's what happened. We just built so many interesting things about it with permission lists and deep inspection and
What were some of the things, like I'm curious on the actual like services that you rendered, like what was it that they needed that you ended up building for them?
Yeah, so we started looking at network traffic, so attacks from the outside and then things from the inside that were inappropriate. And so that was just purely on network traffic, and we had to sort of push the limits of what you could do, looking for bandwidth defenders. If there's problems on the network, you could play the traffic back. When there's internal HR investigations, started looking into that. We looked at, and so we had this very interesting place in the network where we could see pretty much everything that traversed these choke points. And, so we could say this is why you've got bandwidth problems. This is why you've got jitter. This is what you can do from grabbing voice data and spitting it out into MP3s for use later, because it's trading environment and you need to have that kind of stuff going on. So we ended up building tech like a circular queue and memory to pull data as fast off of the network, the NICs, right? As quick as possible, things that just didn't exist before. And there's just a lot of the crazy sort of breakthrough first time situations, right? We had all this incredible data, and from that we could start building up permission lists. So there was a point where people were downloading malware just by single click, right? And so we built up this method that said you were only permit to download executables from this list of 30 that we had across like a few dozen clients. So this permission list, and then automatically block it. And so in this sort of 6-month period, people would accidentally click something. The antivirus was not catching it. And so they'd be rebuilding 4 or 5 machines a day. And it doesn't matter how well automated you had it, like it was just such a PETA. And so this sort of little, I call it the executioner, right? Executioner. And because it would just kill this malware. And it took attacks down from 5 or 6 for every client down to 0 for months and months and months.
And how did you set up the what did the contract look like? Like, were they paying monthly? Like, was it a big contract? How did you set that up?
Yeah, so it was at the beginning they paid monthly. We did an annual contract and pay monthly. When we brought people in that actually had business acumen, a 3-year contract that's paid annually and revenue recognized as it occurs. That's what it turned into. But like I said, I had a vacuum paucity of business knowledge, and we're just making the rules up as we went along, quite, sort of InfoSec cowboys and founder right? Like Communitech was only a couple of years old. We were in Cambridge, so we weren't really part of the KW society, right? There's no YouTube. Wasserman hadn't put books out. It was just this sort of open desert.
Were you profitable on this single customer?
Not by the first one, but like we were super lean. We also had we had currency arbitrage, which was really in our favor as well, because the dollar was around 67 cents, and the fight for local talent was quite a bit lower than it is now, and we squeezed every penny. Right, when I went down to New York, I would, a flight to New York on Air Canada was about $1,000. We would drive down to Buffalo and take JetBlue into JFK. Every dollar was just squeezed until it screamed, right? And this was it's so profitable. We were growing, 30% every year, right? Like this is organic growth. I was doing the sales efforts as well, right? Just sort of talking to everybody that I could, having ideas.
And I assume, like, what were the numbers back then? Like year one would have been what, like a couple $100K in terms of revenue?
Yeah, I think it took about to get year 7, I think, where we hit $1 million US. Especially at that time, there's a few early stage investors that would come out and talk to us, by sort of word of mouth or whatever. And we described this thing that we're doing. And they'd say, well, we really like hardware. We really like software. We don't understand service at all. So they had no real interest in funding that. And, a couple of years after that last one came by, they boomeranged back and said, hey, we'd like to talk to you again. As well, we haven't changed it. Like our numbers are up, but we haven't changed anything. And they said, no, you have an annuity. And this is before, Bessemer came out with.
They're just discovering SaaS, yes.
Yes. This is before Bessemer came out with the MRR and ARR and so on. So they annuity. It's like, okay, we're like that. Yes, I guess that's what it is.
VCs are funny, man. Like it's an interesting tangent, right? Because things are hot, in particular moments, and like business models get all like, SaaS like these days is not nearly as hot because of AI of what it was. But when I started in venture not that long ago, we're talking, let's say 7 years ago, like B2B SaaS, but this is probably like peak hype. And yet the businesses might be there before, the value might be there before. It'll still, like, the market's not that efficient, I guess is my point. Like, it'll take a few years until everybody wakes up to something that, from a founder perspective, you might have been like, I've been doing this for a long time. I guess you put a name on it and you got excited.
Yeah, that's sort of, you feel sort of like a prophet out in the wilderness. And eventually, maybe the world will turn and put a spotlight on you. That's one of the things why I talk to a lot of early stage founders, and it's not necessarily the best thing to be the first one building whatever this thing that you're building is, because if you have to educate the public, you have to wait for them to catch up.
It's tough to be a pioneer.
Exactly. It's like you have to wait long enough, and it can be done, right? We did it, but there's a lot of lean, cold nights in that desert as you're waiting for the world to come around.
That's another question I like. In those 7 years, you're growing to $1 million. I mean, things are going relatively well, but you're working a lot for probably a little relative to what you could have been making or were making as an employee, I would assume. How did you justify it through that time? How did you think about it?
Well, it was just a death march, right? It has to work. It has to work. And pig-headed and kept pushing forward. We kept making better, more revenue. We expanded things. We pushed things forward on a technical basis, and the clients were really happy. And that helps inspire you and keep you forward. Like we're completely committed to making it. If it didn't, we're going to go down in flames, and there'd be no excuse for us not trying hard enough. And around the sort of year 8, we came across this guy named Jay Haynes. So J. Paul Haynes. He became our first CEO. And, I joke with him, like, you hate the serial entrepreneur, but that truly, he had just finished selling one of the businesses he was working with. And that company was just across the hall from our place in Cambridge. So he came on board, and he had, experienced all the things that I did not have. Right. So I couldn't have spelled PMF back then. Right.
Did you know you wanted a CEO though, or how did you decide to go out and get him?
So we were looking for like an advisory board, right, just sort of help us move it along. And then he came on board. It's like, we don't need a board of directors. We don't yet need probably an advisory board, but we do need somebody with the chops, right? The thing is like, I've been working really hard at this. It's got to pay off, right? Like to your point, if I'm going to work this hard, it has to really, really rocket ship. And organic growth is not doing it. I don't know what I don't know. I've taken this company about as far as I think I can take it with what I know. We need to bring somebody on board. And so, he came on board. I joke with him sometimes as I looked at him like he was the life preserver. And, I'm out there. Okay. I've been swimming for 8 years. Okay. They threw the J. Paul Haynes life preserver at me and I grabbed that thing as okay. We can go forward with this. And it was terrific. Like he was just very inspiring. He's still with the company, came on as CEO.
We have tens of thousands of people who have followed the show. Are you one of those people? You want to be a part of the group. You want to be a part of those tens of thousands of followers. So hit the follow button.
What did he do differently? A lot of times like you kind of see these been there, done that people, and you just assume like they can come in and transform. And I mean, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I'm curious what he did.
We went out and talked to all of our clients, what they love, what they hope for, what they want to see this thing. Got really tight on the messaging. I had no idea what marketing was required. Tightened up the sales and marketing process.
How big was the company, by the way, like people-wise at this point? Like 10 people?
No, like 15, 20 people, I think around that time. Pretty much all developers or SOC people, so Security Operations Center, sort of a split of half and half. I think we had one sales guy by that time, and he's still with the company as well, even right now. And we were doing four-legged sales calls, right? Because that's what it took, right? To get the message across and so he could get the spiel, get the cadence, get the tone, understand what the clients were looking for.
So that's a lot of like the learning that he did, but then was he able to kind of change the growth curve of the business?
So like he helped bringing in some early stage money.
How much did you raise at that time?
It was I think $1 million and a half. So nothing extraordinary. Just some local, Canadian investors. I think Al-Karim Javrev, who's with Espresso now, was an early investor as well. Just enough to let's bring in people who've done this before and transform it from just a bunch of cybersecurity cowboys, shooting down the bad guys, to an actual business. And so as he's doing that, he's learning about information security and cybersecurity, and I'm learning what it takes to build a business as well. So in this sort of mutual, I'm watching what he's doing, he's watching what I'm doing, and both sort of elevating from that.
And what's going on in the macro? When I think about your story, I mean, this seems like the birth of managed service providers, MSPs, MSSPs. Like, what's going on there, and how much does that help drive the business forward?
Yeah, so there's other competition coming in. Like SecureWorks got acquired by Dell, and so they were kind of quasi competition. And so I got really tight on their strengths and weaknesses and use that in our messaging. And so when we go to, head-to-head competitions, I knew exactly what to do. And we won 95% of the time on head-to-head competitions.
Dive deeper on that, because it's tough to win head-to-head that often, even on product, which has features and these sort of things. But with services, it feels like it should be even harder.
Yeah, so I started off by saying they're both hamburgers, okay? We're both selling hamburgers. They're selling McDonald's. We're selling something from, I choose a burger joint that was local to the domicile I was selling it to. So let's say it was going to be Burger's Priest. So I said, where you get to choose the bun and the toppings. And so, you want a Big Mac? You can go anywhere in the world and you get the same Big Mac. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Once in a while, you want a Big Mac. I think you deserve more than just a Big Mac. You deserve this, and it's a bit more customized. So we would go into, if there was at the time, a service provider, if they saw something, if an MSSP saw a weird piece of behavior, like an alert came through, they would send a message telling you that there was an alert. So the end user would receive this alert. There's something bad going on in your company. Not a lot of detail. It was up to them to do the investigation. And so that would be like having a fire department. A fire breaks out in your house, and they call you and say, "Hey, there's a fire in your house. All right. You got the call?" Like, "Yeah, you got the call." "Okay, all right, take care." And they hang up. Like, no, you don't want the fire department to tell you that there's a problem, a fire. You want them to come and put it out. And what's more, if you could do that proactively, that's what you want to do. There were cases where there were a lot of false positives in these alerts that came out. And so it's like, well, how do you know it's a false positive or not? They would leave that up to the customer to discover this, because we had been grabbing the network traffic just like a DVR. We could play it back and you get this alert, you could do a deep investigation in real time. And so that they would never get a false, so no false alarms. If we see an attack that came across another client of ours, we're going to proactively defend you against that attack. It never even makes it to your company. And then if there is an attack, we're going to get in there, we're going to engage with the attacker, we're going to kick them out, and we're going to get it all clear.
And why were you able to do that and the competitors weren't? I mean, it seems like the obvious thing to do, like, at least when you say it, you're like, yeah, if you have a problem, solve it. Like, yes, definitely. That's what I want. But why wouldn't they do that too?
It was not obvious then. It was sufficient just to say, hey, there's this weird thing going on in your network. Go send your team to take a look at it. Looking back, yes, of course, it's obvious. It was not obvious then.
It's a matter of kind of like going the extra mile before anybody else did it.
But like if you want a Big Mac, you've got a Big Mac. And that was the talk track that developed. And I could use that. We put a system in and we put the preventative blocks in. And at the end of the demo, I'd say, look, I pull up the log of everything that we prevented that we knew was bad, that got through their firewall. I said, here's 170, this week, 170, 570, whatever number of attacks that made through your firewall that we know are bad, and we blocked them for you. And so there was they would take that list and it would go to whoever we were up against and said, well, what would you do against these? They said they didn't have the data. They weren't keeping the data. They weren't looking for the data. They were looking for just basically signatures of bad behavior. And if it didn't match the signature, they wouldn't register it. So it basically redefined what a vulnerability assessment looked like, because at the time people were just doing external scans. We started doing internal scans and looking at network traffic as well. And it was a tough market to get into. People did not want to get into managed services or the monitoring immediately. So we used it as part of the vulnerability assessment. And so instead of getting an alert at 4 weeks after the event, here's some bad things that were going on, because that's how long it took to write up a report, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. And then here and then we'd have the operations center saying an alert, there's something bad with this machine, pull it, clear it. And so at the end, they get the report and they go, here's the vulnerability status. We can give this to our investors. We can give this to, the SEC if they were asking or things like this. But there's this thing that in the here and now told us there was a problem and helped us kick it out. Can we keep that in? So that's how we flipped from a pure consulting piece, which was our wedge in, to 50%, 60%, and now it's 90+% of the revenue. And that's when it turned into MRR. That's when it got very exciting.
Is a product? Is a product, or what's the
service offering?
Because the wedge was kind of more of an audit, like a one-off.
They all, every financial group of any size need to have this done every year and have an attestation. So, and all they needed at the time was an external scan. We said, we'll give you an external scan and an internal scan and the network traffic.
Is like a pen test, like penetration testing, or is it different?
Yeah, there's similarities, but this is what they needed every year. So we'll do that, but we'll give you all this more. And we use that as a wedge to get in.
And then they would say, I want that consistent. And then that's how you would stay in, get that recurring revenue.
Bingo.
And was there any pressure ever, either internally or externally, as you raise more money, brought more investors, to move away from pure managed services to building some sort of cybersecurity product or whatever?
There are questions about that for a while. There's a product that if you're an MSP, not an MSSP, so if you're just an MSP and you want to build your own operations center, your own MDR piece, you can use the tech we use, right? So that's the product that's come out, but it's a completely different, it's muscle memory, right? In muscle memory and go to market, everything that goes along with that, completely different. And so it wasn't something that we were rushing to do, and it had to make sense. Like we would build technology that fixed problems that our clients had. And it wasn't so much we're going to spin out a product, a standalone product, like a commercial off-the-shelf product. These are all going to be offerings that fit into our larger managed services offering.
And let me ask you this. You took about 7 years to hit $1 million in ARR, in annual revenue. How long did it take from there to hit 10?
3.
You cut it by half and you 10x.
Yeah, boom, right? It was that sort of hockey stick that, it was very, very quick. I think that's one of the things when I talked to Jay, I was like, what did you see in us? And he just said all this raw, sort of not directionless, but not focused talent and clients that just loved us, right? Just bent over backwards, loved what we were doing, wanted to make us more successful. We made them look so good when it came to audit time. that they just want to be part of that journey.
It's funny. I was talking to, I had Mike Maples on the show a few weeks ago. He's one of the kind of earliest, let's say, seed investors, right? He started Floodgate, I think 15, 20 years ago or so. In any case, he was telling me like there's a lot of focus on getting to $1 million ARR. And I think a lot of founders today, for obvious reasons, want to get there as fast as possible. And there's nothing like the faster you grow, all else equal, the better. That's not the point. The point is, though, that he was making is this obsession with getting to $1 million ARR so fast has repercussions, which is that it's not the thing that actually matters. The thing that matters, in his view, and I would tend to agree, is not how fast you get to $1 million, but how fast you can get to 10. Like that 1 to 10 is really the thing that'll set you on this kind of different trajectory. I wonder what you think of that, because you took 7 years to hit to $1 million. It was not fast by any means, but then it really flipped. Like 1 to 10 in 3 years is spectacular. Even more so, I would say, for services, because services is kind of harder to scale. But even for product, like 1 to 10 is incredible. Anyways, curious what you think about that kind of thinking.
Well, I've done some early stage investing of my own, and I think the 1 million is a cool marker. You've got something. It's proven itself in your network. You basically exhausted your network and got to $1 billion, right? And like, I think there's a lot of credence in what you're saying, because what got you there here won't get you there. And that is basically what you're going to say. Like, yeah, so you've proven something. All your friends, all your network agree with you. They're willing to put up, a little coin or a lot to get you here. The muscle memory that you have to get here to sell is not going to work. So it's sort of grade school versus high school. Those relationships, those classes, it's a whole different thing. And so there's the first $1 million is incredibly difficult, and then the next 9 is the next most difficult. This is where you run into tech debt and just people who didn't. They were happy in the scrappy early days. And there's the situations you've got sort of the bud to boss scenario, right? 2 people who are hired at the same time doing the same thing, and one gets promoted, and there's always some sort of unhappiness there that you have to start dealing with as well, right? So there's so much that has to change to get to 10 from 1.
What would you attribute for, in your case, the speed of 1 to 10 to mainly? Is it changes in go-to-market? Is it changes in just market readiness and timing, or something else?
Well, it's everything, right? But the best be like, how do we tell our story? How do we tell our story to a non-technical buyer? Because it moved a lot from the CTO to the chief compliance officer at that certain point. And that, went up to the CFO when there's audit pieces. And so it was how do we tell our story in a way that doesn't require us to talk about how fast we can pull network traffic off a network interface card.
And this is how you tell your story relative to someone else, or relative to, like, I'm curious, in the beginning, 2001, 2002, was it always a bake-off? Was it always a situation where they're going to spend on someone, the question is who? Or did it go from that to, at first, they might just not spend, they might not have any sort of investment there, and then after a while, it was like, yes, for sure, we're going to spend this money, but it's a question of who. Like, did that change over time?
It was, so in the first couple of years, it was, why do I need this at all? I don't even believe there's a problem, right? I remember going into one company, and they were fairly big, and there were a lot of problems in their network, right? A lot of active malware in their network, and a lot of vulnerabilities. And the CTO, usually this kind of thing would take half an hour because it's all well documented. We were in there for over 2 hours, and he went over every single bullet of what I brought up, saying that's not the case. That's not true. It's not the case. And I know we have forensic level data supporting us. And so by the end of it, like I passed the 2 hour mark, and I just said, okay, so here's my question. Right now, there is demonstrably active malware in your company. What is the acceptable level from a C-suite perspective of active malware in the company today? I just want to know, what's that minimum, which is okay, right? Like, in breakfast cereals, right? There's a certain level of rat feces, which is permitted, right, by the USDA. Just let me know what that number is. I just want to know it formally, and I'll make sure that we just don't report anything. And so the amount of rat feces should be 0. And that was, I had to get them to say that. It was a struggle even for a very sharp tactical person to recognize, this void of you don't actually know what's going on. And this reflects very poorly on you. And so now we have to do something about it. I've just demonstrated, right, that your partner is having an affair. And maybe you didn't want to know about it, but now you know about it. What do you want to do about it? We can ignore it. It's probably best not to ignore it. So that was part of the educational process.
Let me kind of stop it there. Maybe just fast forward really quick. Today, you still, like, the company's obviously still running, still growing. Do you still, but I know you sold the majority of it. Like, do you still own some of it?
I own a small piece.
How did it feel? Like, this is a moment whenever we talk to an exited or partially exited founder that we go through, like, you spend so much time, building something, and there is like that kind of 0 to 1 event where you exit, or a majority exit or whatever. Like, I'm always curious the feeling of it. Like, what was the day after that actually closed like?
I think, it just felt like another day, to be fair. I stepped back, 2 years ago, almost like during the summer 2 years ago. And that felt more like, a different chapter closing, right? It felt, the way I described it was 3 years now. So, it was 21 years, almost 21 years. I said, as soon as you're with my baby, and, I would go places and introduce myself, Eldon Spric, eSentire. That was my surname, right? And, and I said, look, I've put 21 years in my baby. As soon as my baby can drink legally in the States, I shouldn't have to be a helicopter parent anymore. And so that was like the stepping back. That was I don't need to be a helicopter parent. And so here we are. That was the feeling that I felt like. It was. There's a group I belong to, which is a lot of exited founders, and you go through these same sort of group of things where you start doing some angel investing. You start, you have you start working on your health a little bit better. You reconnect with family. You read a bunch of books. You start traveling. Maybe you have a small mental crisis. Like, what do you do? Write a book, do some consulting, right? And then, should I start a new business? Should I start a podcast? Right? So,
which one did you do? Did you write a book?
I wrote a book. I did. I have. So I wrote it. Committed, and it did really well on Amazon. It was basically one of the things I was doing was working with a group out of TMU called Rogers Catalyst, so cybersecurity companies, and so I've been doing that for just over 4 years now, and so it's just a bunch of startups, cybersecurity startups, Canadian mostly, and walking through all of these things to help you grow. And so the book came out of this, 8 or 9 cohorts had come through the program, and there was no YouTube, there was no YC. And even with all these things right now, I still see them making the same mistakes. Every cohort, every company, pretty much the same mistakes over and over again. And when they're pitching or selling, I was like, oh, this is exhausting. And it's like, I so want to make you better, not to make the mistakes I made, make more exciting, innovative, right? Be a mistake innovator. And so I started writing down like an FAQ, so I wouldn't have to keep saying the same thing over and over. And then, it 55,000 words later, there's something to publish, right? And so it was a very raw, concise, for a tech founder who knows nothing about business, what do you need to do? And so I just like, that's what it turned into.
What would you say are some of those like most common mistakes that you see founders making?
Every pitch deck followed exactly the same format. Here's the name, cybersecurity. It's a $88 ding-dong-dillion problem. We can solve cybersecurity problems. Here's our team. We're raising 2.5 mil in a safe, the end. And so, we'd have all the other mentors and EIRs in there. Like, I'd let everyone else go first because I think I have a tendency to bowl over anybody else in my way. So let everybody else go first. I was like, okay, I have no idea what you do. I don't know how you're going to solve it. You say you solve that problem. Some of the mentors are not technical. And so, I am technical, but I have no idea what you do. Is it a box? Is it software? Is it AI? Is it training? Before we get into use of proceeds, what do you do? So, by the end of that, and that's kind of a grilling because I'm not gentlest person. When I get fired up, everyone comes out of that group better than when they started. But I wrote chapters about everything, including PMF, of course, which is essential. But I think the one thing that I think particularly Canadian founders struggle with is founder-led sales. And I didn't even know it. That's what I was doing at the time, right? There was no books on founder-led sales really for this at the time. But
You think they struggle because they don't do it right or they don't do it at all?
both, but mostly the latter, right? Where that we have this, if it's our Canadian persona, our style that, sales is dirty or like a used car salesman, sort of things like, no, this is, you better be selling everything, your ideas, right? Because you just simply won't survive. The main thrust of the book, you get these under all these hats, but you have to be the chief survival officer. All right. And that means don't run out of cash. You need to be the one, like, what does it take to survive every single day? You need to be out there fighting for your survival. My wife raises chickens, and there's times I look out because, we live out in the country and there's coyotes and hawks. I had this moment of epiphany where I said, everything likes to eat chicken. Everything wants to eat, like chickens will eat other chickens as well. This is your startup, right? Everything is out to get you, and you better figure out how to survive. And part of that is being authentic, like listening to what the customers need, putting the pedal down every single day, because you simply will not survive if you don't. There's nothing, you salesman, greasy, right? No, you better believe in your product and you better get out there and put the pedal down and sell it.
Well, that's a perfect spot to end it, Eldon. Thanks so much for sharing your story. It's been awesome.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Pablo.
Wow, what an episode. You're probably in awe. You're in absolute shock. You're like, that helped me so much. So guess what? Now it's your turn to help someone else. Share the episode in the WhatsApp group you have with founders. Share it on that Slack channel. Send it to your founder friends and help them out. Trust me, they will love you for it.